city of Del Mar wants to buy the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and the buzz has begun, along with speculation and rumors. So on Wednesday, Del Mar's Mayor Richard Ernest held a press conference to provide some answers. KPBS reporter Allison St. John was there and is with us now. All right, Allison, is it official now that Del Mar is trying to buy the fairgrounds?
That's correct. The City Council, the Del Mar City Council, has taken a vote resolving its intention to pursue a plan to buy the Del Mar Fairgrounds.
What was the major point that the mayor wanted the press to come away with so that the public would understand something?
He says that there's a lot of myths floating around, so he wanted to bust some myths, and one of them was that Del Mar would be wanting to control the activities of the fairgrounds. So he said, we are not going to control it, we are going to buy the land, but then there will be a regionally appointed board with representatives from the county, various cities around, and some environmental groups, and the board will be the one that will actually will manage the property.
Okay, well, right now, the state of California basically appoints the board. I mean, it's the governor who appoints the board.
That's correct.
So who would appoint this balanced board?
Well, each of the agencies that would have a representative on the board would appoint that representative. So the county would have one, the city of Del Mar, the city of Solana Beach, the San Dieguito River Valley JPA would have one, and it hasn't yet been determined as to who all the different interest groups would be that would have someone on the board, but probably up to 9 or 11 people on that board.
Now, the fairgrounds were actually located in the city of Del Mar. Right. Why does Del Mar want to buy the fairgrounds?
Well, the city of Del Mar, I think, feels like the way that it's being managed right now is not to their liking. There's a plan, a master plan for the fairgrounds, which would put a large hotel with condos on it. I talked to one resident of Del Mar who said that there isn't a sense that the Del Mar Fair Board is really considering the needs of the Del Mar residents. Traffic is getting really bad. They no longer have a way of getting off the freeway that avoids the traffic, and they would rather have a board that was more sympathetic to the local residents.
We're talking about a figure of $120 million. Now, to a lot of people, that's peanuts when it comes to buying those, what is it, almost 400 acres. Some of it is wetlands, but the rest has the racetrack on it, and then the fairgrounds.
Beautiful
and all
coastal site, yes.
Exactly. So it sounds inexpensive. How did that $120 million figure come up?
Well, it depends on how that land is used. The $120 million is something that the governor's office actually estimated, and that's because the governor's office wants to see the site used the way it is now. The governor does not want to see major development on this site. He wants the fairgrounds to be preserved and the racing to be preserved. And under those conditions, it's not really a big money, or at least not more of a big money maker. So people who say that it might be worth up to $1 billion, for example, they are looking at it with the possibility of very different kinds of uses and development.
That $120 million may not be a lot of money to some people, but for a little city, Del Mar is the smallest city in the county.
It is.
2 square miles.
Fewer than 5,000 residents.
Yes. I mean, how can they afford that?
Well, they have a plan which involves 3 different elements. One of them is to actually borrow from the state. Another is to use bonds. And then a third is to get some investors who are Arizona-based investors who are horse owners who really want to see the racetrack preserved as a key to the whole racing industry in the country, to invest up to $50 million. So those 3 things would mean that, and here's another point the mayor really wanted to make, that the city of Del Mar's general fund would not be at all involved. It would be an enterprise fund that would handle all of this financing arrangement, and so the city's finances would not, he says, be affected.
California wanted to sell this, or at least Governor Schwarzenegger wanted to sell it because it needed the cash. State is bleeding money. Right, but if this is going to be a borrow-borrow situation, there's no cash involved.
Well,
not much, anyway. That's
right, and I think the point being that if the governor is saying he doesn't want to see the uses changed, then there probably wouldn't be a lot of profit, to be any more profit than is currently being made. It's currently pretty much self-sufficient. So, the state is really not going to ever see much income coming from it, and so the real issue here is control. Who controls it? And the current fair board, being appointed by the governor, is actually not really being controlled by the governor. So I think one of the main issues in this whole thing is would a board that is regionally appointed actually have more accountability to different local agencies?
Just very briefly, Christine Kehoe, Senator Christine Kehoe is going to introduce this legislation quite soon. She's on board with it. What has to happen in Sacramento before it can move forward?
Well, she has to pass this legislation again, which would give the green light for it to go ahead. And I just wanted to mention that the Fair Board is now saying they may be backtracking on their plans to build a big hotel. So that's another element of the whole story.